prayed yet.
Yeah. Come on in. Come on in. Hi, Christine. All right, let's ask the Lord to bless our study this morning. Father in heaven, we thank you for the goodness that you are. We thank you for the blessing of being your children. We thank you for the joy of being able to be here this morning and be with our fellow Christians and study your word so that we can know what is best for us to do. We pray that we'll learn some things today that are useful and helpful, and it's what you would want us to learn. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, everybody, we are going to be in 2 Samuel today, and the first place we're going to read after a bit of introduction is in 2 Samuel chapter 5. That's about 3 slides in. So you want to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 5. I take that back. I think it's 2 Samuel chapter 7. Nope. No, yeah, 2 Samuel 7. All right. We've been mainly in 1 Samuel. We've talked about, if you'll remember, we talked about the snakes in Samuel. We talked about, a whole bunch of things. And we finally made it into 2 Samuel. And, of course, this is the last Sunday I'll be able to teach. I mean, Gib is taking over, I believe. Did he tell you about that? Yeah, okay. Gib will be taking over, and I don't know what he's got planned. So I'm going to give an overview of 2 Samuel. But anyway, here we go. We set the scene because Saul dies at the end of 1 Samuel. Right at the end of 1 Samuel is when Saul falls on his sword and dies. The first part of 2 Samuel, there's a big, long poem of lament of David, lamenting the death of his master Saul and Jonathan as well. So there's some interesting things that we're not going to go over this time. There's quite a bit of fighting in the first few chapters of 2 Samuel. Of course, any time back then when you had a change of king, you would assume that the sons of the king would take over, but David had already been fighting Saul for a long time. You had Abner, who was the commander of Saul's main military commander, who was propping up one of the sons of Saul. And you had this fighting back and forth. Of course, eventually David won those, and Saul's, with a lot of machinations and a lot of intrigue, Saul's son was killed, and Abner was killed as well. So there was a lot of fight. There's a lot of fighting that goes on in the first few chapters. David finally becomes king at age 30, which is interesting, okay, for what I'm going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But David does become king at age 30. He reigns for 7.5 years at Hebron, and then he reigns for 33 years at Jerusalem. And because anytime they put a name on there, I go, well, where is that? Where's Hebron? Where's Jerusalem? There it is. Hebron is about 20 miles due south of Jerusalem. Of course, it's very hilly country. That's somewhat of a topographical map, and so it's a very hilly country. Jerusalem is just kind of even with the top of the Dead Sea. Hebron, of course, is a place where is famous in the Abraham story. So David was in the south. The Philistines, of course, are down in here. And David had been hiding a lot down in this area in various places. Jerusalem, of course, again, when Saul was king, Jerusalem was not the capital of Israel. Saul was kind of over here and down a little bit, but it wasn't until David was 7 years into his reign that Jerusalem was conquered by the from the Jebusites, and it became the capital. Setting the scene still, during those first few years of his, well, not first few years, after he captures Jerusalem, David brings the ark back to Jerusalem. He's the one where he was dancing in front of the ark with all his might. And he brings the ark back to Jerusalem. He builds his own house. He builds a big mansion. You don't call it, what do you call a king's house? Palace. He brings his own palace. Yeah, his own palace. Yeah, that's it. Okay. He acquires wives. 8 of them are listed, by the way. You can count them up. He had at least 8 wives. I say at least because the Bible just records 8 of them. He acquires lots of concubines. Solomon, of course, is the one that's famous for having 300 wives and 700 concubines, but he's just building on what his dad did, trying to outdo his dad, which is not necessarily a good thing. All right. He's also told that he's not going to be able to build God's house. He calls Nathan in, and Nathan, he says, hey, I want to build God a house. Nathan says, that sounds like a good idea. And so then Nathan goes home, he sleeps on it. God speaks to Nathan and said, no, I don't want David to build the house. And David said, yeah, I'll at least be able to acquire the materials because my son will build the house. Well, where we're going to start is, we're going to start in chapter 7 here in just a minute. But the third snake arrives. That's Hanun. We talked about him a couple of Sundays ago, 2 or 3 Sundays ago. The third snake arrives about chapter 10. And I wanted to say this. Yeah. So all of this is happening when the third snake arrives. All of this has taken place. All of these things have taken place. And what I eventually want to get to for the main part of today is chapters 11 and 12, which is kind of the crux of 2 Samuel. And so David is probably about 50 years old. He's probably about 50. Can't tell for sure, but there's a lot of stuff that happens, okay? Bunch of stuff that happens. And then finally, when you get to chapter 11, he's probably about 50, okay? Probably about 50. He's on the run all through his 20s. And when he was anointed for the first time, he was probably just a kid, probably a teenager. And then he was, for several years, he was on the run from Saul. He was doing all the things that we've been talking about for the last couple of days. So he's on the run. He does become king at 30. We're given that date. And then he starts consolidating his power. That's when he had all those battles with Abner and Saul's son. That's in his 30s. He was still down in Hebron at that time. Finally comes to Jerusalem, so he's probably about 37 when he arrived at Jerusalem, 37, 38, somewhere along in there. And then he probably battled the Philistines and the Amalekites and the Ammonites. And then on north of Damascus, there's evidence that David's kingdom extended all the way to the Euphrates. And so probably in his 40s was when he was doing battle with all these. He'd consolidated his people. He was king of both Judah and Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And so probably about the time chapter 11 occurs, he was probably about 50. That's a rough estimate, okay? But it makes sense. Okay? And so you get the feeling that maybe David is the anointed one. Maybe he is the one that is going to lead the people. The anointed one. The anointed one. Maybe he is the anointed one. He is an anointed one. But maybe he is the anointed one who's going to lead the people of Israel. Because David made many, many good choices throughout first and especially the first 10 chapters of 2 Samuel. Made a lot of good choices. Twice he made the decision not to kill Saul, and I I got off on that for a couple of Sundays where I talked about the providence of God and the freedom of God. He did defeat snakes. He defeated the snake. We talked about that one for about 2 or 3 Sundays. He did defeat the snake called Goliath. He did defeat Nahash, whose name was Snake. And then in chapter 10, the son of Snake came in, and he was pretty much on his road to defeating all of the snakes. And what I wanted to read first in 2 Samuel, chapter 7, is God's speech. I don't want to call it little. After David had done all of these good things, I mean, there's no doubt that David was the warrior king. He was the poet. He was a man after God's own heart. And so here in chapter 7, starting with verse 5, there it is. We could start with the verse 4 if we wanted to. And it goes all the way through verse 16, is God speaking to David through Nathan. Anyone want to take a shot at, let's go ahead and start with 4 through 16. Go ahead. Okay, all right, so this is God's speech through Nathan to David. And again, David had done all these good things up until we get to chapter 11. And so God is rewarding. He said, I'm the one who brought the people out of Israel. I got the judges, and then I picked you. I pulled you out of the sheep herd and made you king over my people Israel. And I'm going to do all these things for you. It seems to be messianic as well. He seems to be referring to Jesus, at least that's who we would assume it is, until he gets down to verse 14. I will be a father and he will be my son. When he commits iniquity, I will chasten him by the rod of men. So that's not exactly a messianic thing, but the rest of it seems to be talking about the future coming. And so this is another one of these messianic things. But again, it's very complimentary of David. Very, very good. David actually has his response, the 18. We're not going to read through it, but just point out a few things out of that. In verse 18, who am I, O Lord God, and what is my house that thou hast brought me thus far? So David is speaking in appropriate humility. Appropriate humility. He is talking in the language that, yes, you are my God. I am your servant. I am ready to be, I will be your servant. So David responds there in chapter 7, pivotal. All right, Chad, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Start speaking through prophets. He does, doesn't he? Yeah. 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 Flood of thoughts, Chad, okay? Flood of thoughts. You ought to go back to, it's interesting to go back to when God appears to Moses at the burning bush, okay? And prior to God appearing to Moses at the burning bush, the examples that we have of Melchizedek, all right, are that he was a priest king, all right? And there's kind of evidence, if you read through it, that he probably wanted Moses to be a priest king. Okay? He probably wanted Moses to be a priest king. Moses said, no, I can't do this. He refuses several times, 5 times I think it is. And then on the 5th time, God gets angry at him. He says, okay, all right, here's your brother. Here's your brother. We'll make him priest and you can be king. He doesn't use the word king, all right? Doesn't use the word king. But he's going to be the political leader and his brothers. And so there's kind of evidence of the divide right there. And then he kind of stopped speaking to the priest too, with Eli. If you read through with kind of a jaundiced eye at the history of the priesthood, it's not really good. The priests are not these paragons of virtue and, just like the kings weren't. And so who's left? Well, the prophets. So God will speak to who he has to speak through. That's a whole lesson, Chad. You need to work that one up. All right, talk about when God stops speaking to the priests and stops speaking to the kings and starts speaking through the prophets. That's a great thought. Yeah. Good. So anyway, we've talked here. We've made all the way through. I haven't made it all the way through, but we're kind of giving an overview here. Something happens between chapters 10 and 11. Don't know what, okay? Don't know why, don't know how, but we have this progression in the story of David. He's probably a little bit older. In chapter 10, Hanun, the third snake, the son of snake, rebels against Israel. He embarrasses the delegates who are sent to negotiate with Hanun or express sympathy for the death of Nahash, Hanun's father. And then the next thing happens. Well, let me go ahead and put it this way. In 2 Samuel 10, David is still in the field leading his armies. David is still in the field leading his armies. He's still doing what the people of Israel expect the kings to do, which is to defeat the enemies of Israel. But starting in 1 Samuel 11, David starts sending. He sins. In 1 Samuel 11, instead of going out with his armies, It says, David, there it is, in 1 Samuel 11, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go forth to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites, besieged Rabbah, and David remained in Jerusalem. They tell me that that word remain just literally means sat. David sat in Jerusalem. And if you read the story again, just read it through in chapter 11, there's about 11 times that they use the word sent. David sent. David sends for Bathsheba. David sends for Joab. I mean, the word sent is used. You get this picture in chapter 11 that David has been king for a while. And if he is 50, yeah, I remember 50. Okay, yeah, you're starting to get a little creaky, all right? Things work, but not as well. Probably you have this guy, David, who has been on the road, doing battle, just all the time. And, he goes, I've got to go back out and defeat the Ammonites again, okay? I did it once. I've been out there this past fall, past summer. I just don't want to do it again. And so David sends Joab, his nephew, his chief military commander. I like this picture, by the way. I spent too much time looking up pictures, but yeah, David and Joab. Joab was David's nephew, and so he's probably about 20 years younger than David, probably. So you got David in his 50s sending out Joab in his 30s, which probably makes sense if you think about it for a while, all right? So he sent them out. If David was 50, he's probably getting tired of life on the road. Joab, probably about 20 years younger, and so David sent and sat, all right? That's what he was doing. He was sending and sitting. Of course, in chapter 11 is the story of David and Bathsheba. David and Bathsheba. It starts just the very next sentence. It happened verse 2. Verse 2 of chapter 11. Happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking upon the roof of the king's house. He saw on the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent. There it is. He sends somebody. David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Verse 4. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself from her uncleanness. She returned to her home, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am with child. So there's a lot of sending out, okay? There's a lot, hey, you go do this, you go do that, okay? I got this one. This is a Rembrandt painting. I spent, again, maybe a little too much time, but I couldn't show the whole thing. I'm bold, but I'm not that bold. And, this is supposed to be the moment when Bathsheba reads the letter where David has sent for her, okay? So David sends for her, and she's reading this and contemplating it. And I just thought it's a beautiful painting. Rembrandt's a good painter anyway, but she's probably thinking this is not going to come to any good. And that the expression on her face? It said, this is not going to be any good. I'm stuck here. I'm married to Uriah. She was probably about 20-something, all right? So you got this old king, about 50, sending for this young lady, about 20 or so. And she's smarter than him. She knows what he wants. And probably not. Yeah. And there's you can get in all the debate in the literature whether, why was she on the rooftop bathing? Yeah, why was she on the roof? There's all sorts of debate on that, which makes great journal articles for professors, all right? But it's just, yeah, whether or not you could. Yeah, there's all that debate. Yeah, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I choose to believe that huh? Yeah, in Hawaii you can get an outside shower. I stayed in a hotel one time that had an outside shower. Yeah. Anyway, I can't let a scripture go by without thinking about comparing this to the story of Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve saw the fruit, took it, and ate it. David saw Bathsheba. He took her, and he made her. He got her pregnant, and so there's a lesson in there. That's a good sermon whenever I want to work that one up. But so many times in sin we see, and it's good, and it's beautiful, and then on the inside it's not, and we take it when we know we shouldn't. So I wanted to spend just a minute to talk about why. Why did David fall? What is the fall of David? Because in chapter 7 that we just read, David is giving indications that he understands, who am I? I am just merely the Lord's servant. I'm here to do his will. All in 1 Samuel. He had the opportunity to kill Saul. He never does it. So why here about this time does he fall? Why does he do something that if you gave him the chance to really reflect on it for very long, that he would say, no, I really shouldn't have done that. Okay? And of course he does confess his sin to Nathan just a little bit later on. We'll get to that one too. A lot of times when you think through these sorts of things, the simplest explanations are the best ones. The simplest explanations are the best. And it probably has something to do with David's age. He is 50. He's getting old. He is tired of life on the road, and so he stays behind when he should have gone out. Okay? He should have been at the head of his armies. And eventually, we'll find out in chapter 12, at the end of chapter 12, he finally does return to the field. But he's getting a little bit older. He's probably been king for about 20 years, and he's gotten used to the power. As Mel Brooks said, it's good to be king. And for those of you that watch any Mel Brooks movies, those of you that will confess to watching Mel Brooks movies, History of the World Part 2, if anybody wants to see it. But he's been king for 20 years. He's gotten used to sending people, and they go, right? Like the centurion said, I tell people to go and they go. I tell people to come and they come. And so David is used to giving orders, and what Bill just said right here under his breath a little bit, but power corrupts. Power corrupts. You see something that is good and beautiful and you want it, you just take it. That's what kings do. Well, at that time, he had eventually 8. And he's got a whole harem back there, all right? He's 20 years into his reign. He's got plenty of women to choose from, so why does he need that one? Okay. You've been on the road for quite a few years. I mean, you're sitting there in the palace, you're sitting there in your house, you're on the rooftop in the cool of the evening, and you see something that is pleasurable, and you have the power to take it. You have the power to take it. And so it was Aquinas who said there's 4 main temptations that we all have that bring us short of the glory of God. He said wealth, power, pleasure, and fame. He said those are the things that people fall for all the time. Nothing wrong with wealth, okay? But if that's what you're seeking, you're going to fall short of the goodness that is God. No problem with power if you know how to use it. If you can be like he was in chapter 7 and understand that I am a sinful man and God has given me this power. And actually God says that here in a few minutes. We'll be reading that. He just became a little too relaxed, okay? I wanted to say on too relaxed. You notice that, I don't think, yeah, we did. We read that part. It says, it happened, in verse 2, late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking upon the roof of the king's house. When it says he arose from his couch, that probably means he had been taking a siesta, okay? He'd been taking a nice long nap. And quite often in the Bible, sleep is a euphemism for not being watchful. Sleep is a euphemism for not doing the things that you should be doing. I've got it in my notes. The one that comes immediately to mind is Peter, James, and John. And Jesus asked them to stay awake for 1 hour and pray with me. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And their eyes were too heavy for sleep. There's another one in, I believe it's Ephesians. But in Ephesians, Paul does the 8 wives, unknown number of concubines. I can't remember. But there's another scripture that I had, and I didn't put it up here, I don't think. I might have put it on a later slide. Yeah, Dennis. Yeah. It is a lesson. It is a lesson. I was thinking about that as well. That, when David was on the road, okay, in battle, sleeping in tents, sleeping outdoors, okay, his senses were heightened. His senses were, his understanding of the Lord. Plus at camp, you've got plenty of time to play the harp and reflect on things. And so, yeah, he was the poet king. And now he's not like Alexander that he cries that there's no more worlds to conquer, but he's been on the road enough. And he's in this palace, and he's just a little too relaxed. And Bill was going to say something. Yeah. Yeah. We do. I mean, and I know I get in trouble when I've not got enough to do, Yeah, Don? Yeah. 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 So he's might be pushing 60 about that time. Yeah. 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 Well, or just old. It doesn't. It doesn't. And we have David to have a good example of that. He might have just been bored. I mean, if you're busy and you got a job to do, then you stay out of trouble a little bit less. And I think we just have to remember that he probably forgot. He had a moment in time when all of his senses were down, and there's certainly a sermon in there as well. Bruce? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. 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 All that stuff. Yeah. Your life is not your own. Your life is in service to God. Yeah, good. All right, so we know the story. That's why I didn't read it. You guys all have read the story many times. Bathsheba lets him know that David know that she's pregnant. Immediately he sends for Uriah. And again, I'm not exactly sure how to work this particular picture in, okay, but I thought it was a cool picture. So, yeah, these are David's mighty men. I thought this one was good because You get on the old interweb and search for some good slides for your presentation, and you get all these guys in medieval costumes, that this is obviously not right. But I thought this one was good because who knows how they look, but dadgummit, I think that's probably good. All right? Yeah, so this is Uriah right over here somewhere, all right? But one of the mighty men. And he's a Hittite. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He could be a mercenary. He could be a convert. He could be a convert. It could be that he is a mercenary that came down just to fight with the guy that had been very successful. But he could be a convert as well. And I've forgotten what the word Uriah means, but it translates into something that indicates that he's a Jewish convert. Anyway, moving on. So he finds Uriah. You guys all know the story. Uriah, of course, is more righteous than David. He won't go into his wife. David gets him drunk the next night. Still won't go into his wife. And then David sins by Uriah's own hand, knowing that Uriah wouldn't open up the letter. Right? He sends the message to Joab to have Uriah killed. Okay. After Uriah is killed, of course, after the 7 days of mourning, they got to do this in a hurry because she can't start looking pregnant. But David brings Bathsheba in as his wife, and then, of course, you have the story of Nathan in chapter 12. In chapter 12, you had, which is interesting, go to chapter 12, verse 1. In chapter 11, David is the one doing the sending. David, 11 times, sends somebody. He sent for Bathsheba. He sent for Uriah. He sent messages. David was the man doing the action. And now here in chapter 12, it's God's turn to send. Okay? In chapter 12, verse 1, it said, the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said, okay, and then we have the story that Nathan tells of a poor man with a little lamb, and a rich man that comes in with lots of sheep, and the rich man takes the little sheep from the poor man and serves it to his guests. And David gets indignant about all that, and of course that's when Nathan says, you are the man. You are the man. You're the one that has done all of this. Chapter 11, David sins. In chapter 12, God sends Nathan. And God always has the final say. Keith's got a point. Yes. Yep, I am. Yep. It's great to have people in class that have read ahead. Okay? I want to talk about, let's go ahead and do this. Let's turn to chapter 12, verse 7. Chapter 12, verse 7. After Nathan has said, you are the man. He does in verse 7. You are the man. Then Nathan tells David the consequences of his actions. Let's go ahead and go through 15. Chapter 12, verse 7 through 15. Anybody want to take a shot at that one? Randy, go ahead. Go through 15, or first half of 15. Then Nathan went to his house. Okay, so we've got this little description of David confessing his sin, but Nathan continuing to say, what's going to happen? Here is a result of this sin that you have committed against God, and you have committed obviously against Uriah and Bathsheba as well. Here are some of the consequences. Yeah, well, here they are. Okay? Man, I got no one's reading ahead back there. All right? Good. The sword will not depart from your house because you brought the sword into the house. You're the one that did that because David used the sword to destroy Uriah's house. Because David used the sword of the Ammonites to kill Uriah, God is not going to allow the sword to depart from David's house. I will raise up evil against your own house. David was the one who allowed evil to enter into his own house. Right? I will take your wives from you because David took Uriah's from him. Right? There's a parallel there as we sit sometimes and contemplate the problems that David brought upon himself. Okay, it's because of the problems that he committed and that he brought upon his own house. Well, there's a whole debate in some of the literature I was reading whether or not it really was secret. I mean, come on, he sent people to go find Bathsheba. You think there wasn't gossip going on? Oh, look, David did this, David did that. And then he sends it to Joab knew what was going on. I mean, you can't read some of that stuff and not realize that Joab, I know this randy old man, he's doing something else again. Dennis, real quick. Correct. And the interesting one to compare to that, Dennis, is compare how David reacted to Nathan's telling him he was the man, as opposed to the way Saul reacted to when Samuel told him he had done something wrong. Saul was continually trying to lay it off on somebody else. Well, the people made me do this. They made me do this. David didn't do that. And I think there's a big lesson in that, Dennis. I think there is. I think you're exactly right that the reason that God forgave David so quickly, because the penalty for adultery is death. The penalty for adultery is death. Is that right? The woman and the man. Yep. Yeah, I don't know. We also have this idea that David sinned against the Lord, and we don't have time to go into Psalm chapter 51, which would be a great thing to do if we had another month to talk about it. But in Psalm chapter 51, I have sinned against God. Against you and you alone have I sinned. And you read that and you go, well, you didn't do too good by Bathsheba and Uriah either. All right? I mean, why is David able to get away with saying against you and you alone have I sinned? Because God is the ground of all good. Let's tie this back into us talking about the providence of God. God is good. God is the definition of good. God is the ground of all good. If you commit evil, you have done something contrary to the source of all good. Not only have you done evil, but you've done evil against the person who is the ground and source of all good. And so therefore, any act of evil is a sin against God. I think I got one more on there. Joseph understood this. It reminded me of the story of Joseph. Remember the story of Joseph? And Potiphar's wife grabbed a hold of him and he said, how can I do this and sin against God? All right, sin against God. He didn't say a sin against Potiphar. He sinned against God. And so much more. There we go. Okay, all right. That's it. We'll see you guys again sometime. Yes. I've got a couple of slides on that because it's not only the consequence of sin against God, but the whole nation. Yes. When you're a leader, if you're just you and me, I'll just go out on the field. Yeah.
When you're the top guy.
But when you're the top guy, it's a sin against.
I see that sinning against your life. I see that as